I've spent the last 3 nights staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of that night over and over. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because the sound of my thoughts is unbearable, and putting them into words feels like a tiny, fleeting relief. Or maybe because I feel like I'm falling apart, and I need someone, anyone, to tell me I'm not insane for how this all went down. So here it is. The story of how I walked into what was supposed to be the happiest moment of my year, maybe my life, and left feeling like I'd been gutted from the inside out. It started with a text message. It was last Friday afternoon. I was at work, sorting through the endless stream of emails that had been piling up all week, when my best friend, James, messaged me, "Hey, man, don't forget tonight, 8 p.m. sharp. Don't make me drag your ass there." I stared at the message, confused. I hadn't made plans with James for that evening, and my wife, Emma, hadn't mentioned anything about us going out. I texted back, "What's tonight?" The 3 little dots popped up on the screen immediately, and then his reply came through. "Seriously? Emma didn't tell you? Forget it. Just show up at Luigi's. You'll thank me later." Now, I should say that Emma had been acting a little different lately. Distant, maybe. Distracted. I chalked it up to her workload. She just landed a big promotion at her job, and she'd been putting in crazy hours to prove herself. We hadn't had a proper date night in weeks, and I missed her, missed us. But I figured it was just a rough patch. It happens in every marriage, right? Still, the text from James left me with a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. Emma hadn't mentioned anything about plans, which wasn't like her. But James sounded so sure, so I decided to just go with it. I left work a little early, swung by home to change, and texted Emma to let her know I'd be out with James for the evening. She replied quickly, "Okay, have fun. Love you." There was nothing off about her response, nothing to suggest what was coming. By the time I pulled up to Luigi's, I still had no idea what was going on. The parking lot was packed, which I thought was odd for a Friday night. I walked inside, and a server greeted me with a knowing smile. "Right this way," she said, leading me toward the back of the restaurant. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just dinner with James. This was a surprise party, and not just any surprise party. When I stepped through the doors to the private room, the shout of "surprise" echoed around me. There must have been 50 people there, friends, family, coworkers, people I hadn't seen in years. And there, standing in the center of it all, was Emma. She was beaming, holding a cake that read, "Congratulations, Ben," in big, bright letters. I froze. For a second, I couldn't even process what was happening. Then it hit me. This was for me. A celebration for the promotion I'd gotten 2 weeks ago. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. It was just a step up in my department, nothing life-changing. But clearly, Emma had thought it was worth celebrating. For a moment, I felt a surge of love for her. She'd done all this for me, planned this party, gathered all these people together, just to show me she was proud of me. It felt like proof that whatever distance I'd been feeling between us was just in my head. But that moment didn't last long. As the night went on, I started noticing things. Emma seemed jittery. Every time I tried to talk to her, she'd brush me off, saying she had to check on something, or make sure the caterers weren't out of drinks. She spent more time huddled in the corner with her friends than she did with me. At one point, I caught her whispering with James, her hand on his arm, and when she saw me looking, she pulled away like I'd caught her doing something wrong. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was overthinking, that I should just enjoy the party and stop looking for problems where there weren't any. And then came the toast. Toward the end of the night, James clinked his glass and called everyone's attention. "All right, everyone, let's hear it for the man of the hour," he said, grinning at me. "Ben, you're one of the hardest working guys I know, and you deserve all the success in the world. We're proud of you, man." Everyone raised their glasses, and I smiled, feeling a little awkward but grateful. I glanced at Emma, expecting her to chime in, to say something about how much she loved me or how proud she was. But she didn't. Instead, she looked panicked, like she wanted to be anywhere but there. It was the first time I felt it, the crack in my chest, the tiny splinter of doubt. But it wasn't until later, when most of the guests had left and the restaurant was starting to clear out, that the crack turned into a full-blown fracture. I was heading back from the restroom when I saw them. Emma and James. They were in the back hallway, near the kitchen, standing close, too close. Her hand was on his chest, his hand on her waist, and their heads were bent together like they were sharing some secret. I froze. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. And then Emma looked up and saw me. Her face went pale. She pulled away from James so fast you'd think I'd caught her on fire. "Ben," she said, her voice high-pitched and strained. "What are you doing back here?" "What am I doing back here?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "What are you doing?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. James just stood there, his face a mask of guilt. I felt like I was watching the scene from outside my own body. My heart was racing, my palms were sweating, and I didn't know what to say or do. I just stood there, staring at them, waiting for one of them to explain, to tell me I was imagining things. But they didn't. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. "I think I've seen enough," I said, my voice cold and steady, surprising even myself. "I hope you two enjoy the rest of the party." And then I turned and walked out. I'll stop here for now. This is already longer than I meant it to be, and I need to gather my thoughts before I write the rest. There's so much more to this story. So many things I still don't understand. So many things I wish I could unsee. If anyone's been through something like this, I could use some advice. Or even just someone to tell me I'm not losing my mind. I wish I could say I stormed out of the restaurant like some hero in a movie, shoulders back, head held high. But the truth is, I stumbled out into the parking lot in a daze, barely able to breathe. My vision felt blurry, and my chest was tight, like someone had wrapped a vice around my ribs and was slowly turning the handle. I sat in my car for what must have been 10 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel. My hands were shaking so badly, I couldn't bring myself to put the key in the ignition. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears and the faint echoes of their voices. Emma's high-pitched panic, James' guilty silence. I didn't know what to do. Should I go back inside and demand answers? Call Emma and force her to explain herself? Or just drive away and pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen? In the end, I did none of those things. I drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't sit there any longer. The walls of the car felt like they were closing in, and I needed air, space, anything to make the crushing weight in my chest feel a little less suffocating. Somehow, I ended up at the park near our house, the one where Emma and I used to go on lazy Sunday afternoons, back when we were still in that honeymoon phase of our relationship, when everything felt easy and bright and full of promise. I sat on one of the benches near the pond, watching the moonlight ripple across the water. It was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it was peaceful, but then the memories started flooding in. Emma's smile when I first walked into the party, the way she looked at James in the hallway, the way she pulled away when she saw me, like she was caught in something she couldn't explain. I felt sick. How long had this been going on? Was this the first time? Or had there been other nights, other meetings I hadn't known about? And why James, of all people? He was my best friend. Or at least, I thought he was. I trusted him. I trusted her. The questions swirled around in my head, each one more painful than the last. Eventually, I pulled out my phone. I didn't even know who I was going to call. I just needed to hear another human voice, something to ground me. My thumb hovered over James' name for a second before I realized how absurd that was. So I called Emma. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Ben?" Her voice was cautious, like she wasn't sure if I was angry or just confused. "Where are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "At the restaurant." "Why? What's going on?" "I think you know what's going on." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear the faint hum of voices and music in the background, but Emma didn't say anything. "Emma," I said, my voice cracking, "just tell me the truth. Are you cheating on me?" I could almost hear her inhale sharply, like the question had physically struck her. For a moment, I thought she was going to deny it. But then she said, Ben, I don't think this is the kind of conversation we should have over the phone. That's not a no, I said, my stomach twisting. Can you please just come home? She asked, her voice soft now, almost pleading. We'll talk there, I promise. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to tell her I wasn't going anywhere until she told me the truth. But I also knew that if I kept pushing her on the phone, I wasn't going to get the answers I needed. So I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, Fine, I'll see you at home. The drive back felt like it took forever. I thought about stopping somewhere for a drink to calm my nerves, but I didn't want to show up at the house smelling like alcohol, not when we were about to have what would likely be the most important conversation of our marriage. When I finally pulled into the driveway, Emma's car was already there. The house was dark, except for the faint glow of the living room lamp. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and went inside. Emma was sitting on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red and puffy, like she'd been crying. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Okay, I said, standing in the doorway. I'm here. Talk. She hesitated, biting her lip like she was trying to figure out where to start. Then, just tell me the truth, Emma, I interrupted. Are you having an affair with James? Her eyes widened, and for a second, I thought she was going to deny it. But then her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at her hands. It's not what you think, she said quietly. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Not what I think. Really? Because what I think is that I walked in on my wife and my best friend looking a little too cozy in the back of a restaurant tonight. So please, enlighten me. What am I missing here? She flinched, like my words had physically hurt her. It's not like that, Ben, she said, her voice trembling. James and I, there's nothing going on between us. I swear. Then what the hell was that? I demanded. Why did you look so guilty when you saw me? Why did James look like he wanted to crawl under a rock? Emma stood up, wringing her hands nervously. It's complicated, she said. I laughed again, this time louder, harsher. Complicated. Right. Because that makes it so much better. Ben, please, she said, her voice breaking. Just let me explain. I crossed my arms and leaned against the wall, staring at her. I'm listening. She took a deep breath, like she was trying to summon the courage to speak. James and I, we've been talking. About you. About us. Talking, I repeated, my voice flat. Yes, she said. That's all it is, I swear. He's been helping me figure some things out. What things? She hesitated again, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. Ben, I've been feeling lost. In our marriage. And James, he's just been someone I can talk to. Someone who understands. Understands what? I snapped. That you're unhappy? That you don't want to be with me anymore? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. It's not like that. I love you, Ben. I do. I don't know. I've been confused and James has been. He's been there for me. I stared at her, my mind racing. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was just some innocent emotional connection that had gotten a little too close for comfort. But the image of them in the hallway kept flashing in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Do you have feelings for him? I asked quietly. She didn't answer right away, and in that silence, I felt my heart break all over again. The silence after my question was unbearable. I stood there, watching Emma as she avoided my eyes, her hands trembling at her sides. The way her lips parted, then closed again, like she couldn't find the words. It was all the confirmation I needed, but I needed to hear her say it. Emma, I pressed, my voice low, cold. Do you have feelings for James? Her hands came up to cover her face, and I heard a muffled sob escape her. I don't know, she finally choked out. Maybe. I don't know, Ben. It hit me like a punch to the stomach. I felt my knees go weak, but I forced myself to stay standing. You don't know? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You don't know if you have feelings for my best friend? It's not like that, she sobbed, finally looking up at me. Her face was streaked with tears, her expression desperate. I never meant for it to happen. I wasn't looking for anything, I swear. It just happened. Those words, "it just happened," made something snap inside me. What exactly just happened? I asked, my voice rising. Did you kiss him? Sleep with him? How far has this thing between you two gone? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. I haven't slept with him, I swear. We've never. She stopped herself, and I caught the slight hesitation in her voice. What did you do, Emma? I demanded, my fists clenching at my sides. If you didn't sleep with him, then what? Did you kiss him? Did you want to? She didn't answer. Jesus Christ, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. Do you even hear yourself? Do you have any idea what this is doing to me? Ben, I'm sorry, she cried. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. Yeah, well, you did, I said bitterly. You don't accidentally end up in a hallway with your hands all over someone. You don't accidentally start having feelings for your husband's best friend. This didn't just happen, Emma. You made a choice. She flinched at my words, like they physically hurt her. It wasn't a choice, she whispered. I was confused, okay? I didn't know how to talk to you about how I was feeling, and James, he was just there. He listened. That's all it was, Ben. I swear. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But the image of them in that hallway, the look of guilt on her face when she saw me, it was burned into my mind. If it was just talking, then why did you look so guilty when I caught you? I asked, my voice sharp. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands again. I stood there for a moment, staring at her, my chest heaving with anger and hurt and 1,000 other emotions I couldn't even name. I wanted to scream at her, to shake her, to make her understand what she'd done to me. But more than anything, I wanted to know why. Emma, I said, my voice quieter now, almost pleading. Why James? Of all the people in the world, why him? He's my best friend. You knew that. You knew how much I trusted him, how much I trusted you. How could you do this? She looked up at me, her eyes swollen and red. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know, Ben. It wasn't about him. It was about me. I felt lonely, like we weren't connecting anymore. And James, he was just there. I laughed bitterly. Lonely, I repeated. You were lonely? You couldn't have come to me and talked to me about it? I'm your husband, Emma. You're supposed to talk to me, not run to someone else. I know, she said, her voice breaking. I know, and I hate myself for it. But I was scared. I didn't want to admit that I was unhappy because I didn't want to hurt you. And now I've hurt you anyway. Her words felt like salt in an open wound. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something, but instead, I just stood there, staring at her. So what happens now? I asked finally, my voice hollow. Do you love him? Her eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently. No, she said. No, Ben. I don't love him. I love you. I've always loved you. Funny way of showing it, I muttered, more to myself than to her. She stood up, taking a tentative step toward me. Ben, please, she said, her voice trembling. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to fix this. I want to fix us. Please, just give me a chance. I looked at her, the woman I'd promised to love and cherish for the rest of my life, and for the first time, I didn't recognize her. I don't know if I can, I said quietly. Her face crumpled, and she started sobbing again, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not this time. I need some air, I said, turning toward the door. Ben, wait, she started, but I didn't let her finish. I walked out of the house and into the cool night air, my chest heaving with every breath. My mind was spinning, my heart shattered into a million pieces, and I had no idea how I was supposed to put it back together again. I don't even remember how long I stood outside. The cold air burned my skin, but it didn't register. My thoughts were loud, relentless, and all I could hear was Emma's voice saying, "I don't know." What does that even mean? You don't accidentally develop feelings for someone. You don't accidentally betray the person you vowed to love forever. After a while, I pulled out my phone and stared at James' name again. Part of me wanted to call him and demand answers, to hear his side of the story. Another part of me didn't trust myself to stay calm if I heard his voice. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Instead, I texted him, "We need to talk. Tomorrow. Face to face." The three dots appeared almost instantly, and I braced myself for his response. "Ben, I'm so sorry. Let's meet. Anytime, anywhere." Sorry. That word made my blood boil. It felt so small, so insignificant compared to what he and Emma had done. But I didn't reply. I shoved my phone back in my pocket and walked to my car. I didn't have a destination in mind, but I couldn't go back inside. I couldn't look at her right now. I ended up at a motel on the edge of town. It wasn't much, a dingy room with faded curtains and a bed that creaked when I sat on it, but it was quiet. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Emma and James, whispering in that hallway, her hand on his chest. I thought about all the nights she'd worked late, all the times James had come over to hang out when I wasn't home. How long had I been blind to this? At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was Emma. I ignored it. She called again and again. Finally, I picked up, my voice hoarse. "What do you want?" "Ben," she said, her voice shaky. "Please come home. We need to talk. I don't know where you are and I'm scared." "Scared of what?" I asked, my tone bitter. "That I'll find out more lies? More secrets?" "No," she said quickly. I don't want to lose you." I didn't respond. My silence stretched, and I could hear her soft sobs on the other end of the line. "Ben," she whispered, "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Please, just come home. Let's figure this out together." I hung up without answering. I couldn't deal with her right now. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how my life had unraveled so quickly. The next morning, I met James. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop, neutral territory. I didn't want to see him in my house, and I sure as hell wasn't about to let him anywhere near Emma again. He was already seated when I arrived, looking every bit as wrecked as I felt. His hair was a mess, and his usually confident demeanor had crumbled into something unrecognizable. When he saw me, he stood up awkwardly, like he wasn't sure if he should shake my hand or apologize immediately. I gave him neither option, sitting down across from him without a word. "Ben," he started, his voice low and heavy, "I'm so sorry." "Yeah, I got that from your text," I said coldly. "Now explain. All of it. I want the truth, James. Don't you dare lie to me." He winced but nodded. "Okay, you deserve that." He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "It started a couple of months ago. Emma, she reached out to me. She said she was feeling lost, like she didn't know how to talk to you anymore. She wanted advice, your best friend's perspective, I guess." I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the urge to hit him. "And you thought what? That it was okay to cross that line? To get involved in my marriage?" "No," he said quickly, his eyes wide with panic. "At first, it really was just talking. I swear, Ben." She was venting, and I was trying to help. But, I don't know. Somewhere along the way, things got blurry. "Blurry," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that what you call sneaking off into a hallway with my wife?" He looked down, shame written all over his face. "I messed up. I should have stepped back, but I didn't. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "How far did it go?" I asked, leaning forward. "Did you kiss her? Touch her? Tell me the truth, James." "No," he said firmly, meeting my eyes. "I swear, we never kissed. We never did anything physical. But I think we both knew there were feelings there. And that's on me, Ben." I should have ended it before it got to that point. I stared at him, searching his face for any sign of dishonesty. For years, I'd trusted this man like a brother, and now I didn't know if I could believe a single word he said. Do you have feelings for her? I asked quietly. He flinched, his jaw tightening. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe I did, but it doesn't matter. I knew it was wrong. I should have stopped it. I leaned back, my chest tight with anger and betrayal. You should have stopped it, I repeated bitterly. But you didn't. You let it happen. You let her lean on you instead of me. I know, he said, his voice breaking, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I never wanted to hurt you, Ben. You're my best friend. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Yeah, well, you've got a funny way of showing it. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The weight of everything hung heavy in the air, suffocating us both. I'm cutting you out of my life, I said finally, my voice steady. We're done. Don't call me, don't text me, and don't come near Emma again. He nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. I understand. I'm sorry, Ben. I really am. I stood up, tossing a few bills on the table to cover my coffee. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, and then I walked out. When I got home, Emma was waiting for me in the living room. She jumped up the moment I walked through the door, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Did you talk to him? She asked, her voice trembling. Yes, I said shortly, hanging up my coat. And he admitted everything, I said, turning to face her. The emotional affair, the feelings, everything. She flinched at my words, tears streaming down her face. Ben, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. Stop saying that, I snapped. You keep saying you didn't want this, but you let it happen, Emma. You chose this. I didn't choose to have feelings for him, she cried. No, but you chose to keep going back to him, I said, my voice rising. You chose to confide in him instead of me. You chose to betray me. Her sobs grew louder, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I love you, she whispered. I love you so much, Ben. Please don't give up on us. I stared at her, my chest aching with a mix of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't even name. I don't know if I can do this, Emma, I said quietly. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. She looked up at me, her eyes desperate. Please, she begged. I'll do anything. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Just don't leave me. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that we could find a way back to what we used to be. But the pain was still too fresh, the betrayal too raw. I need time, I said finally. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I need time to figure it out. She nodded, wiping her tears. Take as much time as you need, she said. I'll wait for you. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I didn't respond. I just went upstairs, closed the bedroom door behind me, and collapsed onto the bed. For the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly lost. The next few days were a blur. I moved around the house like a ghost, barely speaking to Emma. She tried, of course. She'd approach me cautiously, asking if I wanted to talk, if there was anything she could do. But every time I looked at her, all I could see was her hand on James' chest, her wide-eyed panic when she realized I'd seen them. I couldn't escape it. I stayed in the guest room. It wasn't much, a small, uncomfortable bed and a closet half full of junk we hadn't used in years, but it felt better than lying next to her. Every night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. Had this all been my fault? Had I missed the signs, ignored her needs, let her slip away? Or was this just who she was, someone capable of betraying the man she claimed to love? The worst part was, I still loved her. Even now, even after everything. A part of me wanted to forgive her, to believe her when she said she wanted to fix things. But then another part of me, an angrier, darker part, reminded me that forgiveness wasn't the same as forgetting. Could I ever look at her again and not wonder if she was thinking about him? Could I ever trust her again? I didn't have the answers. On the third day, She suggested counseling. We were sitting at the kitchen table, our first real conversation since the night of the party. I was nursing a cup of coffee, staring blankly at the mug in my hands, when she said, "I think we should see a therapist." I looked up, surprised. "A therapist?" "Yes," she said quickly, her hands clasped together on the table. "I know I've broken your trust, and I know it's going to take a lot to rebuild it. But I want to try. I want to understand what went wrong, why I let this happen, and I want to fix it, Ben. I want to fix us." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I saw tears welling up in her eyes again. I wanted to snap at her, to tell her that she couldn't fix this with a few therapy sessions. But instead, I just nodded. "I'll think about it," I said quietly. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Later that night, I got a text from James. I hadn't heard from him since our meeting at the coffee shop, and seeing his name on my screen sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me. For a moment, I debated deleting the message without reading it. But curiosity got the better of me. "Ben, I know I said I'd stay out of your life, but there's something you should know. Can we talk?" I stared at the message, my heart pounding. What else could he possibly have to tell me? What more was there to know? I didn't reply right away. Instead, I sat there, the phone in my hand, wondering if I even wanted to hear what he had to say. I didn't sleep that night. James' text sat in the back of my mind, festering like an open wound. What could he possibly tell me that I didn't already know? Was there more to their story? Another layer to their betrayal? By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. "Against my better judgment," I replied. "What is it? Say whatever you need to say here." The reply came quickly, not over text. "It's important. Please." I wanted to throw my phone against the wall. James had already taken so much from me. My trust, my peace of mind, my marriage. And now he wanted more of my time, more of my patience. But curiosity gnawed at me. So, I agreed to meet him. We met at the same coffee shop. This time, I didn't sit. I stayed standing, my arms crossed, glaring down at him as he fidgeted in his seat. "Make it quick," I said, my voice flat. James looked up at me, his face pale and drawn. "I wasn't going to say anything," he started, "but I think you deserve to know the whole truth." I braced myself, my stomach tightening. "What truth?" He hesitated, looking genuinely torn, and for a split second, I thought he might actually be regretting what he was about to say. But then he took a deep breath and said, "Emma wasn't the only one who was distant. You were too." "What the hell are you talking about?" I snapped. "You've been pulling away, Ben," he said, his voice calm but firm. "For months. She felt like she was losing you. And yeah, she shouldn't have come to me about it. But you weren't there for her either." I stared at him, my anger boiling over. "Are you seriously trying to blame me for this? For what you did?" "No," he said quickly, holding up his hands. "I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying there were cracks in your marriage long before I got involved." I wanted to punch him. I wanted to scream at him for daring to lecture me about my own marriage. But part of me hated that his words struck a chord. Had I been pulling away? In my head, I started running through the past few months. The late nights at work. The times I'd come home too tired to have a real conversation. The times I'd brushed off her attempts to connect because I was too distracted by my own stress. But that didn't excuse what they'd done. It didn't justify the betrayal. "Even if that's true," I said through gritted teeth, "you still crossed a line. You still betrayed me." James looked down at the table, shame written all over his face. "I know," he whispered, "and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." "Good," I said coldly. "You should." I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned and walked out, leaving him sitting there. When I got home, Emma was in the kitchen, sitting at the table with her laptop open in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, her face lighting up with a small flicker of hope. "You're back," she said softly. I ignored her and went to the fridge to grab a bottle of water. "How was it?" she asked hesitantly. "How was what?" "Your meeting with James." I turned to face her, my expression hard. "Pointless," I said. "Just more excuses and more reasons why I'm somehow to blame for this mess." Emma's face fell, and she looked down at her hands. "He's not wrong, you know," she said quietly. I felt my blood pressure spike. "Don't," I warned. "Don't you dare try to pin this on me, Emma." "I'm not," she said quickly, looking up at me. "I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying, we've both been distant. I felt like I was losing you, and I didn't know how to fix it." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "And instead of talking to me, you decided to lean on James. You decided to let feelings develop for my best friend." She flinched, tears welling up in her eyes. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "A terrible mistake. But I love you, Ben. I've always loved you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I stared at her, my chest aching with a mix of anger and sadness. "I don't know if you can," I said quietly. "I don't know if we can." Her tears spilled over, and she covered her mouth with her hand, sobbing quietly. "Please," she whispered, "please don't give up on us." I didn't respond. I turned and walked upstairs, closing the door to the guest room behind me. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in limbo, drowning in anger and pain. I needed clarity. I needed space. When Emma came downstairs, I was waiting for her by the door, my suitcase in hand. Her eyes widened in panic. "Ben, what are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I said simply. "Leaving?" she repeated, her voice breaking. "For how long?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I need time to think, to figure out what I want." "Ben, please," she begged, stepping toward me. "Don't go. We can work through this. We can go to counseling, anything you want. Just don't leave." I shook my head, my throat tightening. "I can't do this right now, Emma. I need space. I need to clear my head." Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't try to stop me as I opened the door and stepped outside. "Ben," she said softly, her voice trembling. I paused, looking back at her. "I love you," she whispered. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked away. The first few days after I left were surreal. I rented a small cabin a few hours out of town, surrounded by nothing but trees and silence. No Wi-Fi, no distractions. Just me, my thoughts, and the overwhelming weight of everything that had happened. At first, I did nothing but sit there, staring at the walls or out the window, trying to make sense of it all. My mind kept bouncing between anger and sadness, disbelief and regret. How had it come to this? How had the life Emma and I built together fallen apart so quickly? Every time I thought about going back, the image of her and James in that hallway stopped me. That moment had become a permanent scar, a wound that refused to heal. But the solitude gave me clarity too. I started thinking about the kind of life I wanted, about whether Emma and I had any real chance of rebuilding the trust we'd lost. Did I still love her? Yes, that much was undeniable. But love wasn't enough. About a week into my stay at the cabin, Emma called. I hadn't answered her calls or texts since I left, but something made me pick up this time. "Ben," she said, her voice tentative. "How are you?" "I'm surviving," I said honestly. There was a long pause on the other end. Then she said, "I miss you." I closed my eyes, leaning back in the creaky wooden chair. "Emma, I miss you too. But missing you doesn't erase what happened." "I know," she said quickly. "I'm not expecting it to. I want you to know that I'm still here, that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this, even if it means waiting for you as long as you need." Her words hung in the air, heavy and sincere. "Are you still talking to James?" I asked after a moment. "No," she said firmly. "I haven't spoken to him since the night you left. I blocked his number, deleted his messages, everything. He's out of my life for good." That was a relief, at least, but it didn't fix the damage. I came back 2 weeks later, not because I was ready to forgive her, but because I needed to face the situation head-on. Avoiding it forever wasn't an option. When I walked through the door, Emma was waiting for me. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her hair messy, her eyes swollen from crying. She stood there, hesitant, like she didn't know if she should hug me or keep her distance. I set my bag down and looked at her. We need to talk. She nodded, wiping her hands on her jeans. Okay, let's talk. We sat on the couch, and for the first time in weeks, we had an honest, raw conversation about everything. She told me about the loneliness she'd felt, the insecurities she hadn't shared, the way she'd let herself lean on James because she didn't know how to reach me. I told her about the pain she'd caused, the betrayal that still felt like a knife in my chest, and the doubts I had about whether we could ever get back to where we were. I want to forgive you, I said eventually, my voice cracking. I just don't know how. Emma reached for my hand, her touch light, hesitant. Then let me help you, she whispered. Let me prove to you that I'm worth forgiving. Let me fight for us, Ben. For a long moment, I just stared at her. Part of me wanted to pull away, to guard my heart from the risk of getting hurt again. But another part of me, a quieter, more hopeful part, wanted to believe her. We started therapy the following week. It wasn't easy. The sessions were raw, uncomfortable, and filled with painful truths. We had to confront things neither of us had been willing to admit before. The cracks in our communication, the way we'd both let resentment and distance creep into our marriage. There were days when I wanted to walk out and never come back. Days when I thought about giving up and starting over without her. But Emma never stopped fighting. She showed up to every session, did every exercise, and opened herself up in ways I'd never seen before. Slowly, cautiously, I began to let my walls down too. It's been 6 months since the party. Emma and I are still together, but it's different now. We're rebuilding, one step at a time. And while it's not perfect, it's progress. I'd be lying if I said I didn't still have moments of doubt, moments when I question whether staying was the right choice. But then I see the way Emma looks at me now, like I'm the only thing in the world that matters to her, and I feel a flicker of hope. We've both learned a lot through this process. About ourselves, about each other, about what it means to truly commit to someone. I don't know what the future holds for us, but for now, I'm choosing to stay. I'm choosing to fight for the woman I fell in love with, even if she isn't perfect. Because in the end, none of us are.